I did IVF as a single woman and thought the hardest part was behind me. Then my best friend looked at my newborn daughter, went completely silent, and said, "My son has that exact mark. I have never seen it on another person in my life." That was the moment my life stopped making sense, and the moment it finally started making sense at the same time. I want to tell you about the year I stopped waiting to be chosen, but before I get to that part, I need to tell you about Lucifer Stone. Yes, that was actually his name. Lucifer. And before you say anything, yes, I stayed with a man named Lucifer for 10 years. My grandmother told me everything I needed to know about that man the day she heard his name, and I smiled and said, "Grandma, it is just a name. It was not just a name, but I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start where everything starts, in Birmingham, Alabama, where I was born with too much heart for my own good and a mother who told me love was the most important thing a woman could build her life around. I believed her completely. I believed her so completely that when Lucifer Stone walked into my high school at 17 with that easy smile and those careful eyes, I decided he was the love I was supposed to build everything around. We lasted from 17 to 35. That is 18 years of knowing each other, 10 of those living together in a flat in Brixton that I had chosen and decorated and made into something warm, something that felt like a home should feel. I cooked Sunday mornings. He ate them. I planned futures. He smiled at them. And for a long time, I told myself that his silence on the subject of forever was just him being a man who showed love differently. What I did not admit, not even to myself, was that we had talked about it several times. Each time Lucifer would look at me with those careful eyes and say something that sounded like honesty but felt like a door closing softly. He would say things like, "I am just not sure I am built for all of this, Chloe." And I would hear those words and make him tea and change the subject because I thought, surely a man who stays must want to stay. Surely love is enough to change a man's mind. It was not enough. And what he said to me the morning he finally left is something I need you to hear, because it is the reason everything else in this story happened. He sat across from me at the kitchen table I had bought, in the flat I had made into a home, and he said, "I do not think I am ever going to be the man you need me to be, Chloe." And I remember thinking very clearly and very calmly that this was information I had actually been given many times before. I had just kept returning it to him unopened. I gave myself 3 months. 3 months of long baths and phone calls to my mother back in Birmingham, and entire Sundays where I did absolutely nothing because I had earned the right to do nothing. And then, on a Tuesday in November, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and I made a decision that would change the entire shape of my life in ways I was not remotely prepared for. I was going to have a baby. On my own. By choice. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Chloe, you were 34, you had time, and technically yes, but I also knew myself. I knew that if I waited for the right person to appear before I started my family, I would wait forever. I had already demonstrated that I was extraordinarily patient to my own detriment. I was not going to do that again, not for anyone. So I started the process, and through all of it, the consultations and the appointments and the paperwork and the days that were harder than I let anyone see, the one person who sat in every single waiting room with me, who held my hand through every difficult conversation, who argued with receptionists on my behalf when they were being dismissive, was my best friend Ji-yeon Park. Now, Ji-yeon is a woman I need you to understand properly before this story goes any further. Because what happens later makes no sense unless you understand what she means to me and what she built and who she is. Ji-yeon and I met 8 years ago on a night shift at the Royal Brompton, where I was in hospital administration. And she was 3 hours into a double shift, and someone had eaten her clearly labeled lunch from the staff room fridge. I found her standing in front of the open fridge, looking at the empty shelf with the kind of exhausted devastation that only a stolen lunch can produce after a double shift with no break. I gave her mine. We have been inseparable since that Tuesday evening. She came to London from Busan at 21, with a suitcase, a nursing textbook she had taught herself from, and a level of quiet determination that I found genuinely intimidating when I first understood the full scope of it. As she raised her son largely on her own after his father returned to Korea when the boy was 7 years old. She learned English while working. She built everything from nothing, and she did it all without making it sound heroic, which somehow made it more heroic than anything I had ever witnessed. Her son's name was Yoon-ho. She talked about him the way mothers talk about the thing they are most proud of and most terrified of simultaneously. Now, he is 25. He worked in tech in Canary Wharf. He was apparently very successful, and also, according to Ji-yeon, terrible at returning calls in a timely manner. I had never met him. At that point in my life, that fact felt completely unremarkable. The IVF process worked on the second round. I remember the phone call with a specificity that I think my brain will protect forever. I was standing in the middle of my kitchen, still in my work clothes, shoes on, keys in my hand like I had just walked in the door. And the nurse on the other end of the line told me the results, and I sat down on the floor because my legs simply decided they were done holding me up. I sat there for a long time. Then I called Ji-yeon. She screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I could hear her crying through the screaming. I started crying too. Two women in different parts of South London, on a random Wednesday afternoon, crying into their phones about a baby who did not exist yet, but was already so completely, desperately wanted. Before I go any further into this story, I need to ask you something. Because this moment right here, this moment of deciding to build something for yourself when everything you had planned fell apart, it's the moment this whole story turns on. If you have ever made a brave decision entirely on your own, for yourself, with no guarantee of how it would turn out, drop it in the comments right now. Because what came next took more courage than anything I had ever done in my life, and I want to know if you understand that feeling before we go any further. 8 months later, on a gray London morning that turned gold by afternoon, I gave birth to a girl. I named her Soleil. It means sunshine in French, and I chose it because that is exactly what she was from the first second I held her. Sunshine after a very long winter. Ji-yeon was the first person in that room who wasn't medical. Right? She walked in and took one look at Soleil, and her whole face collapsed in the most beautiful way I have ever seen a face collapse. We did not say anything for a long time. We did not need to. Some moments are complete without words, and that was one of them. 3 weeks after I brought Soleil home, Ji-yeon came over for our usual Sunday. We had a tradition, the two of us. I made a few delicious meals. That was, by my own honest admission, consistently not quite right. And she fixed it without being asked, and we ate together and talked about everything and nothing. That Sunday was no different from any other Sunday we had shared in 8 years, except that it was the last Sunday of my life before everything changed. Soleil was in her bouncer between us, in that particular kind of deep baby sleep where they look like small, perfect, completely unbothered beings. Ji-yeon leaned over to tuck her blanket, and then she went still. Not gradually, just completely still. Ji? She did not answer immediately. She was looking at something behind Soleil's left ear, a small birthmark, crescent-shaped, like the thinnest sliver of a moon pressed into the skin. I had kissed that mark every single day since she was born. Chloe. Her voice was careful in a way I had never heard from her before. This mark. I know, isn't it sweet? The midwife called it a stork kiss, but I think it looks like a little moon. Yoon-ho has this mark. I laughed. Obviously, I laughed. I said something about coincidences and the funny way genetics scatter themselves across unrelated people. Ji-yeon laughed too. When she reached for her wine and changed the subject, and we finished the afternoon the way we always did, comfortable and warm and easy. But I noticed that she was quiet on the way out. And I noticed that she hugged me a little longer than usual at the door. And I told myself it meant nothing. What Ji-yeon did when she got home is something she never told me about until much later. She went to the drawer in her bedroom where she kept Yoonho's baby photographs, and she sat on the edge of her bed with her reading glasses on, and she looked at those photographs for a very long time. She told me later that she held one photo up to the picture she'd discreetly taken of Soleil that afternoon. The same jaw, the same crescent mark, same placement, same shape. The same something around the eyes that she had spent 25 years looking at in her son's face. Then she called Yoonho. She kept the call light at first. "How is work? Are you eating properly? Did you get the package she sent?" The usual warmth of a mother who calls because calling is how she loves. And then she paused, and she asked him very casually whether he had ever done anything when he was younger, to help with money, that he had not told her about. The silence on his end lasted just long enough. "Come home this weekend," was all she said before hanging up. I did not know any of this was happening. I was living my new life, which consisted mostly of feeding Soleil and sleeping in desperate stolen fragments and staring at her like she was the most extraordinary thing the universe had ever produced, which she was. I was tired in the way only new mothers understand, that particular exhaustion that somehow exists right alongside the most electric kind of love, the two things sharing the same body without canceling each other out. And then Ji-yeon texted me on a Friday morning and said her son was visiting, and she had mentioned I had been having laptop problems, and he had offered to take a look. Would that be all right? I said yes without thinking. He was Ji-yeon's son. I trusted Ji-yeon with everything. He arrived before Ji-yeon did. I want you to hold on to that detail because it matters more than it seems right now. I opened my door on a Saturday afternoon holding Soleil on my hip, still in my house clothes, hair wrapped, wearing an oversized Howard University hoodie. Worse, because I had stopped performing for anyone the moment I became someone's mother. And I found a man standing in my hallway who was, and I say this with full awareness of how inconvenient this fact was, very good looking in the most understated and quietly annoying way possible. Not showy about it. That was the thing. He was tall, unhurried in the way he carried himself, wearing a simple dark jumper and looking at me with eyes that were, I would later decide, dangerously attentive. The kind of eyes that actually listen to what you say and remember it without being asked to. "You must be Ji-yeon's son." "Yoonho." He extended his hand. "Chloe." I shifted Soleil to shake it. "She talks about you constantly." "All good things, I hope." "Mostly." And then Soleil, my 3-week-old daughter who had never met this man in her life, arm reached for him, both arms out the way babies reach when they have decided a thing without consulting anyone. I apologized and tried to redirect her, but she was insistent in that wordless, absolute way babies are insistent about things they want. Yoonho looked at me. I shrugged because what do you do? He took her, and I watched him hold her, and I watched his face do something very calm and very careful, and I watched his eyes find the mark behind her ear, and I watched something move through him, something he immediately and very skillfully put away behind an expression that gave nothing else away. I did not know what I was watching. Not yet. Ji-yeon arrived 20 minutes later. She looked at her son holding my daughter, and something crossed her face so fast I almost missed it. Almost. She made tea. She sat us both down. And then she told me, "I want to try and explain what it feels like to have the floor disappear beneath you while you are sitting completely still." Because that is what happened when Ji-yeon spoke. She talked, and Yoonho sat across from me and did not look away from my face. And the words she was saying rearranged everything I thought I understood about the past year of my life. The donation, the clinic, years ago, his mother's debts, 19 years old, and trying to help the only way he could think of. The hospital matched, same did the timeline. an agreement he filed away as something that happened once and moved on from completely. Soleil, my Soleil. I looked at her in his arms. She had fallen asleep the moment he held her, because she apparently knew things about this man that I was only just beginning to learn. Aaron, I thought about every moment of the past year, every appointment, every decision, every quiet dream I had carefully built around this baby, and I felt something enormous and unnameable move through my chest. Say something, Chloe. Ji-yeon's voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know what to say. I looked at Yoon-ho. He held my gaze, and he did not flinch, and he did not offer me excuses, and he did not perform guilt for my benefit. He just looked at me, steady and honest, the way someone looks at you when they have decided that honesty is the only thing they have left to give. I was 19. I needed to help her. I never imagined... Please don't finish that sentence right now. I asked them both to leave, not cruelly, just honestly. Ji-yeon reached for me, and I stepped back gently because I needed my own air and my own quiet, and the room felt very small suddenly. I just need tonight. After they left, I sat on the floor next to Soleil's bouncer for a long time. She slept. The city made its usual noise outside. I looked at my daughter's face, her sleeping face, that crescent mark behind her left ear, and I tried to locate something clean and clear inside myself, something like anger or betrayal. But what I felt was just complicated, a tangle of things with no easy name. Nobody had done anything wrong. That was the part I kept returning to. Nobody had done anything wrong, and yet everything was completely different now. I stayed on that floor for a long time. Here is what I did not expect. I expected the awkwardness to settle into distance. I expected Ji-yeon and I to find our way back to our normal, and for Eun-ho to return to being a name I heard occasionally in her conversation. I expected my life to simplify itself back into the shape I understood. My life did not simplify. Because Yoon-ho Park, as it turned out, was not a man who disappeared from situations. He was also, and this was the part that caused me the most trouble, not at all what I had expected. I had built an idea of him from Ji-yeon's stories, a picture of a busy, successful young man who existed largely in his career and in his mother's proud anecdotes. The reality of him was considerably more inconvenient than that picture had been. It started small. He came by once to actually finish with the laptop, which was a legitimate reason, and I appreciated legitimate reasons, because they gave me somewhere to put my eyes that was not his face. Then Ji-yeon asked him to drop off some things she had bought for Soleil, and he came. And he stayed longer than a delivery required, because somehow we ended up talking and an hour disappeared, without either of us noticing where it went. Then, one afternoon, he appeared at my door holding a jar of sweet tea. Not shop-bought, made. He had spent, and I only discovered this later from Ji-yeon, who found it hilarious, an embarrassing amount of time finding the right recipe for proper Southern sweet tea, because I had mentioned once, in passing, in the middle of a conversation, he should not have remembered as carefully as he did that I missed it, that I missed the specific taste of it, and that nothing in London came close. I stood in my doorway looking at that jar, and I felt something shift quietly in my chest that I immediately told to stop. You didn't have to do that. I know. Yoon-ho. It is sweet tea, Chloe, not a declaration. But it was. We both knew what it was. The problem was I was 35, and he was 25, and he was my best friend's son and the biological father of my daughter. And there was genuinely no version of this that was simple or clean or easy to explain to anyone, including myself. I told myself I was being sensible. I told myself that what I was feeling was just proximity, just the strange intimacy of a shared secret and a shared child, and too much time in the same small flat. I told myself a lot of things in those weeks, and I was very convincing. And then one evening he was holding Soleil while I cooked, talking to her softly in a mix of English and Korean that I could hear from the kitchen. And I stopped in the doorway and watched them without him knowing I was watching. And every single thing I had been telling myself evaporated completely. Just gone. Like they had never been there at all. He caught me looking and did not look away first. I did. Now I need to tell you about the article. Because this is where things stopped being quietly complicated and became loudly complicated, and I want you to understand exactly how that happened. A fertility clinic in London became the subject of a data privacy story. Records had been improperly accessed. Donor information that was supposed to remain sealed had made its way into places it should not have been. The story ran in a couple of online publications, and it did not name anyone specifically, but it had enough detail that people who were paying attention and looking for things to pay attention to could piece things together. People at the hospital where Jiyeon and I worked were paying attention. A colleague approached Jiyeon in the corridor with the article on her phone and made the kind of comment that people make when they want to be in the middle of something without admitting that is what they want. Jiyeon came and told me that evening, and we both agreed it would blow over. And then I got a text from Lucifer Stone. Heard you use some young guy's donation. Interesting choices, Chloe. I stared at that text for a long time. Lucifer Stone, who had taken 10 years of my life and given me back an empty flat and a very expensive lesson about the difference between patience and love, had apparently decided that this was an appropriate moment to weigh in on my decisions. A man named Lucifer, commenting on the choices of others. I put my phone face down. Then I picked it up and blocked his number. Then I put it down again. What I did not know was that the article had reached Eunho's world as well. His colleagues had seen it. Someone at his company had made a connection and said something thoughtless in the way that thoughtless people say things. And suddenly what had been a private, quietly unfolding situation had an audience that neither of us had invited. And then Jiyeon called her son. She told me about this conversation much later. And when she told me, I sat very still and listened and understood, finally, why everything went quiet. Whatever you are feeling about Chloe, Jiyeon had said to him, I need you to be careful. Alma, she is my best friend. Soleil is connected to you by biology, but Chloe is her mother completely. If you pursue this and it does not work, I lose everyone. Do you understand what I'm asking you? He understood. And I want to pause here because I think this is one of the most important moments in this whole story. And I want to ask you something before we go any further. Has anyone ever asked you to be careful with someone you were already falling for, out of love for everyone involved? Has someone who meant well ever stood between you and something real without meaning to? Nary, drop it in the comments, because what happened next is something I think many of us have lived through in our own way. And I need you to stay with me here. He went quiet. Not cold, not rude, just quiet in the particular way that someone goes quiet when they are trying to do what they think is right, and it is costing them more than they are letting on. He stopped coming by. He answered Jiyeon's messages, was present in his mother's life, cordial when our paths crossed through her, exactly the behavior of someone who had made a responsible decision. I matched his energy because I had a lifetime of practice at that. I smiled. I got on with things. I reorganized a kitchen that was not messy. But at night, after Soleil was asleep and the flat was quiet and there was nobody to perform composure for, I thought about sweet tea made from scratch and eyes that actually listened, and how Soleil had reached for him the very first moment she saw him. I thought about Lucifer Stone, who had all the time in the world and chose not to show up. And I thought about how exhausting it was to keep being the person who tried not to want too much. I was so tired. Jiyeon saw it. Of course she did. She knew my face the way I knew hers, completely and without trying. She fell into step beside me in the hospital corridor one morning and looked at me sideways, and I said, "Don't," before she could say anything. "I am not saying anything." She said, "Good," I replied firmly. She said nothing for the rest of the walk to the staff room, but I heard myself speak before I could stop myself. "Does Yoonho seem different to you lately?" "Different how?" "I don't know. Quieter." Jiyeon was quiet for a moment. "He is figuring things out." "Aren't we all?" He came to my door on a Wednesday night with nothing. No laptop excuse, no groceries from his mother, no reason I could hang the visit on. Just him, in the hallway outside my flat, looking at me with those attentive eyes. I know I have been distant. Yes. I needed to think. About? About whether what I feel is real or whether it is just circumstance, biology, proximity, all the easy explanations. I crossed my arms. It was a protective thing I did, and I knew I did it. And I did it anyway, because some habits exist for good reasons. "And what did you decide?" "That I needed to stop overthinking and be honest with you instead." "Oh no." "I know the age gap. I know whose son I am. I know what this looks like from the outside. I know every single complicated thing about this situation, Chloe. And I am still standing at your door on a Wednesday night. And the thing is, I wanted to let him in. I want you to know that." I stood there and I looked at him, and I felt, for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit, completely and helplessly seen by another person. Not performed at, not managed, not tolerated, just seen. And I wanted it more than I wanted to be careful. And then I asked the question I should not have known the answer to. "Your mother asked you to be careful, didn't she?" The pause was less than a second, but it was there. "Go home, Yoonho." Not cruel, just honest. Just protective of the part of me that had already been broken once by a man who could not decide if I was worth the complication. I closed the door and put my back against it and stood there in the dark hallway listening to his footsteps go quiet. And then I stayed there longer than I needed to. 2 days later, Jiyeon arrived at my flat in the evening without being invited, which was not unusual, but with an expression I had never seen on her face before, which was, she sat across from me with 2 cups of tea she had made herself in my own kitchen, and she looked at me for a long moment before she spoke. "I said something to Yoonho that I should not have said. I waited. I asked him to be careful with you. I told him that if things went wrong between you, I would lose everyone I love." She looked down at her cup. "I was protecting myself. I dressed it up as protecting you both, but I was protecting myself. And I sent my son away from the door of a woman who makes him, for the first time in his life, want to stay somewhere. Gee, I have watched you love carefully and get hurt anyway. I have watched you give and get nothing back, and then get up and give again. I know who you are, Chloe Decker, better than almost anyone on this earth." She looked up. "And I know who my son is. And if I am standing in the middle of something that could be good because I am afraid, then I am not the friend I believe myself to be." The flat was very quiet. "You are my best friend, G." "Yes, which is exactly why I refuse to be the reason you settle for lonely again." What Yoonho was doing at that exact moment, I only know because he told me later. He was at home, sitting with his phone in his hands, looking at a photo Jiyeon had sent him months earlier of Soleil the week she was born. Jiyeon had sent it to him the way she sent him everything important, without explanation, just because he was her son, and she wanted him to know the things that mattered. He told me he had looked at that photo many times since she sent it, and sitting there that night, he was thinking clearly and without confusion about the difference between a fact and a choice. Soleil was a fact. She was permanent and beautiful and connected to him in a way that no decision he made could alter or reduce. Chloe was a choice, his choice, and he had let his mother's fear and his own overthinking cost him a Wednesday night that he intended to go back and reclaim. He called Ji-yeon. "I am going to try again. I wanted you to know first." Ji-yeon was quiet for a moment, and then softly, "Bring her flowers." She pretends not to care about gestures. She does. There was a cultural evening in Brixton, the kind of event that Brixton does better than anywhere else in the city. All noise and food and warmth and the specific energy of a community that has kept itself alive and loud through everything. Ji-yeon had invited me weeks before any of this, back when Sundays were still simple, and I had almost not come. I went because Soleil deserved to be out in the world, and because I was tired of staying inside my own thoughts. I put her in the wrap against my chest, and I went, and I told myself I was going for her. I was standing at one of the food stalls, trying to manage Soleil and a container of something that smelled extraordinary, when I felt someone come to stand beside me. I knew before I turned. I do not know how to explain that except to say that your body sometimes knows things your mind is still arguing about, and mine had apparently made a decision it had not shared with me yet. He was holding flowers that had the energy of a man who had thought about them for too long. Not elaborate, just honest. Deep orange and red dahlias, the kind that looked like they had been chosen by someone who actually stopped and paid attention. Which I was learning was exactly the kind of person he was. "Ji-yeon told you I would be here." "Yes. So this is coordinated?" This is me not running from something real because it is complicated. He did not step closer. He gave me space. And I noticed it because he had always done that, given me space, every single time. Never pushed, always showed up and let me set the pace. I had not let myself name that quality in him until right then. I know I hesitated. I know I let you close a door I should have held open. And I know you have been here before, Chloe. Not with this exact situation, but with this feeling. Waiting for someone to decide you are worth the complication of loving properly. I did not move. I am not asking you to trust that immediately. I am asking you not to decide this is finished before it has even started. Because it has not started yet. And I think you know that as well as I do. Soleil made a small sound against my chest, that soft, purposeful sound she made when she wanted someone to acknowledge her existence. We both looked down at her at the same moment. And then we looked up at each other at the same moment. And there was something so unguarded in both of us right then. Something neither of us was performing for the other. "You are 25, Yoon-ho." I am aware of my age. This is genuinely insane. Completely. Your mother is at home hoping this goes well. I called her before I came. I laughed. I tried not to, and I laughed anyway. A real one. The kind that comes from somewhere you did not know was unlocked. The kind you cannot manufacture. It came out of me before I could make a decision about it. You called your mother before coming to tell a woman how you feel about her. She is my best resource. I looked at him, the flowers, the city around us being warm and loud and completely indifferent to us in the best possible way. So lay awake now and watching him with those dark, knowing eyes of hers that had recognized him from the very first moment. And I thought about Lucifer Stone, who had never once called anyone before showing up for me, mostly because he never actually showed up for me. And I thought about 10 years of patience that looked like love until I finally saw what love was actually supposed to look like. I thought about what Ji-yeon had said to me 2 days earlier at my kitchen table. Settle for lonely again. Maybe just one dinner wouldn't hurt. I heard myself say it. That is all I am agreeing to right now. His whole face changed. Not dramatically, just quietly and completely, the way a room changes when someone opens a window in it. He looked like a man who had just been handed something he had every intention of taking very good care of. I will take it. 3 months later, on a Sunday afternoon in my Brixton flat, Jiyeon was in my kitchen fixing the dinner I had attempted and failed to get right for 8 years running. She fixes it every single time without being asked and without comment, and I love her completely and without qualification for it. Yoonho was on the living room floor with Soleil, who had recently discovered that she could grab his hair, and considered this to be the most extraordinary development in the history of human experience. She grabbed. He made a face. She laughed that big, completely uninhibited baby laugh that I would do absolutely anything on this earth to keep hearing. He made the face again. She laughed harder. I stood in the kitchen doorway watching them, and I felt something move through me that was, I realized, something I had been waiting a very long time to feel. Not the desperate, anxious kind of love I had spent a decade trying to maintain. Not the kind that required me to make myself smaller and hope it was finally enough. Just warmth. Simple and full and mine. We walked through Brockwell Park that afternoon, the three of us, Soleil in her pram between us, the October light doing that London thing where it turns everything amber and golden for about 20 minutes before it decides it is done for the day. We were not performing anything for anyone. We were not in a hurry. We were just two people walking through a park in South London, figuring something out one honest step at a time. Jiyeon walked a little behind us, which she claimed was because she wanted to give us space and which I strongly suspected was because she wanted to watch. I glanced back at her at one point and saw something on her face that was real and complex. The particular emotion of watching your son belong somewhere new, and watching your best friend finally stop apologizing for wanting good things. Both of those things living on her face at the same time. I reached back for her hand without saying anything. "Come on, Ji. Keep up." She rolled her eyes. She caught up. That night, after everyone had gone home and Soleil was asleep, and the flat was quiet in the way that a flat is quiet, when it is full of something rather than empty of it, I stood at my kitchen window with a cup of tea, and I looked at Brixton doing what Brixton does at night, lit up and completely, unapologetically itself. My phone buzzed on the counter, a message from Yoonho. "Still thinking about that dinner, by the way. Best decision I ever pushed for." I looked at my phone in the dark kitchen, and I thought about the girl I had been at 17, falling for a boy with careful eyes and building her whole heart around him. I thought about the woman I had been at 34, sitting on the floor of the same kitchen, with a broken relationship and an open laptop, and a decision to make about what kind of life she was actually going to live. I thought about Soleil asleep in the next room, who had reached for this man the very first moment she laid eyes on him, and I typed back, "Don't make it weird, Park." 3 dots. Then, "Too late." I laughed quietly so I would not wake the baby, and I stayed at the window a little longer than I needed to, holding my cup with both hands, watching the city. Here is what I know now that I did not know a year ago. Waiting for someone to choose you is not the same as love. Patience is not a love language. And sometimes the life you thought you had perfectly planned opens up in a direction you never would have thought to draw for yourself. And the only question is whether you are brave enough to walk toward it instead of standing there explaining all the reasons you should not. I was 35 years old. My daughter had a crescent moon behind her ear. My best friend was her honorary grandmother and the fiercest person I have ever known. And the man I was falling in love with had called his mother before showing up with flowers, which told me everything I needed to know about who he was. For the first time in a very long time, the flat did not feel empty. It felt like the beginning of something,